Hello and welcome to the final Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast of the year. 2024 started with two epic wins for the ages, playing out at the same time in Hyderabad and Brisbane, and it finishes with a couple of Boxing Day tests that will live long in the memory as well. South Africa are in the World Test Championship final for the first time after beating Pakistan by just 2 wickets at Centurion. And Australia are 2-1 up with 1 to play in the Border Gavaskar Trophy series after taking 7 wickets in the final session at the MCG, which some are claiming to be the most watched test match in the history of the game. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Ben Gardner and Mark Butcher. Merry Christmas, warm seasonal regards and all that. But like me, you thought it was all done and dusted with 1 session to go at Melbourne. So this isn't the place to go to for detailed analysis of that final session.
What happened in the final session? No. Disaster. Australia seemed to have run out of puff, and Joe as well. And Pant were playing without too many alarms. The odd risk, which created an alarm perhaps, but nothing that suggested the bowlers were on top, at least until such a time as a second new ball perhaps came along, by which time it would be very, very late in the day indeed. And then wake up at 6:30 and the whole thing's over and done. And Travis Head is the hero of the hour for breaking the partnership. So, hurrah. And controversial DRS decisions, heroes and villains all over the place. Just the usual Border Gavaskar Trophy, box office stuff, which is it's fantastic. And that record in terms of the amount of fans that came in through the ground, plus, of course, a global television audience, is just something else, isn't it? And one in the eye for those who think that Test match cricket should be 4 days as well. So you had everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very healthy week for Test cricket, full stop. You've got the records broken at the MCG, the Centurion Test match. There was a great soundtrack to all days there with the band playing in the background at all times. Really healthy crowd there. And then Afghanistan are playing Zimbabwe in a 2-test series, which is the sort of thing that doesn't really happen anymore. 2 teams not in the World Test Championship playing each other in more than just a one-off test match. All manner of run-scoring records broken there. But just a general question from Ben Hayes, who only 5 hours ago wrote in saying, just an observation, but given the reduction in test match draws in the last 2 years, I can't stress enough how much I'm enjoying this 4th test between Australia and India. I was guilty of forgetting how enjoyable this specific type of tension can be. This is from Ben, who described himself as an England supporter enjoying being in a suitable time zone for cricket in Australia. I think that's a really good point, because such a good part of this test match, even when Australia were a long way ahead, was you could sense that the pitch was quite flat and it was difficult to take wickets. So even on day 2, you're like, okay, Australia are on top, but how are they taking 20 wickets here?
Yeah, I mean that, but isn't that the game? That, and it's part of the reason I think on our last pod when we were talking about sort of England's capitulation in the final Test match of the New Zealand series was the idea that forcing your opposition to kind of really hard earn a victory was kind of something that's gone out of the vocabulary of England Test matches, because it's either win or loss, and it happens to get to be all over and done with in a very short space of time, one way or the other. But you're absolutely right. You get the tension of two very, very good teams in a series that means an enormous amount to both teams and both sets of supporters, and sort of with every wicket being something that is an event within itself. You end up with that tension. Plus, of course, you've got the series is on the line. Plus, of course, the outside narrative of who is going to qualify for the World Test Championship. So it throws up all sorts of things. It threw up that people were questioning Cummins' decision, not to have declared at some point on day 4. But then when you kind of add in all of the extra factors and sort of going, well, if we give India too much of a chance and they take it and win, then they've held on to the trophy. It also makes it very difficult for us to qualify for the World Test Championship. All of those decisions are much greater than just the ones that are taken on the night. And as it turned out, Cummins got everything absolutely right and is in pole position now to not only win the series but to take on South Africa in that final at Lord's. So there were so many things in play over the course of that Test match, and not least of all was the absolute joy of the fans in the ground and the investment in those people in the spectacle that was unfolding in front of them from day one to the last. And sort of, I don't think we can stress that enough. Simply from the fact that we've how long do we have to listen to the idea that Test match cricket is dying? Nobody cares. People don't want to go and watch all this kind of stuff, and yet you have the biggest crowd ever, overtaking a record from Bradman's day back in the 30s, right here in 2024, and that's something that should be shouted from the rooftops.
I think it was interesting in this game and this final day, also seeing a team having to almost relearn how to bat out for the draw. I think it's almost like a lost art, because it's so rare that you have these final day rear guards, but also these ones where there is a little bit of a time runs equation where, especially we've seen how Rishabh Pant can go, how Jasprit can go, where they're thinking, maybe if we get off to a good start and we build a couple of partnerships, then we can have a dart. And then I think when they're 3 down at lunch, that's sort of out of the question. And I think, as you say, with Butch saying there were a couple of moments of the alarm where they're just kind of in isolation, look like quite odd, aggressive options taken at various points where you're like, why are you trying to just score a boundary here? That doesn't help. That won't help your position whatsoever, because you don't have a chance of winning the game. And yet it must be such a hard thing to do, just to switch entirely to defensive mode. And also for some batters, they might think that, well, if I go complete into my shell, my chance of survival actually decreases rather than increases, not because of the pressure it put backs on the bowler, on the bowling team, just because of how well played. But then I guess you saw how Pant got out, sort of, pulling head to long on, and Rohit actually coming out and being fairly critical of Pant in the press conference, saying that he can be frustrating. Obviously, it's the way he plays, but he needs to figure out himself what the right way is to go about it. He's had success. But then you look also at, how Rohit and Kohli got out as well. I think especially Rohit, to be honest, playing quite a flamboyant shot through mid-wicket. It sort of looks a bit less dramatic because he edges it to slip rather than hitting it to the man in the teeth. But that is playing an aggressive shot against the new ball when you've not got a run all series, basically, when you're trying to save a Test match.
Yeah, he's on pretty shaky ground, isn't he? Having averaged 6 for the series so far. So yeah.
Yeah, and the genuine talk that he might not even make it to Sydney, which would be some call to make with one Test to go. There are so many things that happen in this game that in a normal Test match, that would be the talking point, and we'd spend 10 minutes on all of them. You got Steve Smith's return to form. Jasprit Bumrah's maybe the best ever. Nitish Kumar already announced himself as the next potential India superstar. But for me, by an absolute mile, is what happened on the first morning. And Sam Konstas, 19 years old. He only just turned 19 years old. Born after the 2005 Ashes. He's opening the batting. He takes the first ball against Jasprit Bumrah, who up until that point in the series averages 10. Khawaja says, you go on, you take the first ball, and doesn't lay about on anything in the first 10 balls he faces. Then tries to ramp a couple, fails, but then goes again, he goes again. Takes Bumrah for 14 in an over just with a ramp shot. Takes him for 18 in an over later on. And with a shoulder barge incident with Virat Kohli, his idol, in between. He's out for 60 well before lunch. He sneaks in a in-game interview with Fox Cricket whilst he's still batting. And then by lunch, he's signing autographs in front of 95,000 people at the MCG. I texted a few people during that innings, genuinely fearing for the future of Test cricket in a very similar way, or when everyone just only bowled bouncers at Lord's in the Ashes game in 2023. It's like, is this all people are ever going to do? When Konstas started with those ramps, I was like, oh, is Test cricket just going to be this now? But actually, there was an immense amount of skill around what Konstas was doing, and the drama around it as well was extremely watchable.
You've just described a kind of like an Instagram, the Instagram Test cricketer, haven't you? Born after 2005. That was the first eye-watering bit. The second bit, which I might pick you up on, is the Khawaja, the who takes the first ball thing, because I would imagine that Konstas would have gone, that Khawaja would have said to him, "What do you want to do?" And Konstas would have gone, I'd take first ball. I normally take first ball, or let me take first ball, just trying to get it out of the way. So I wouldn't say that his senior partner threw him under the bus. I did a very similar thing with Mike Atherton back in 1997. There was no ramping there. I hasten to add. But just he's down there on Bay 13, revving up the crowd like Merv Hughes and all this kind of stuff. It was just, it was a young lad having the absolute time of his life and being allowed to do so, I suppose. And there perhaps is the biggest sort of contrast between, let's take 1997 and my debut and this one as an example. The sort of the fear and the kind of the do's and don'ts, and the don'ts list was very much longer than the do's, for a debut back in those days, as opposed to what seems to be, we picked you because you can do this. Go out there and do that. Be a sort of, a caricature version of yourself on your Test match debut, and nobody will chastise you for it. And that's an extraordinary thing. And we will see more of it. Does it mean that that all Test match batters will be like that? I don't think so. But I think in terms of being allowed to sort of go out there and express yourself in that extreme way is not something that players are going to be scared to do or encouraged not to do, unless of course they maybe play for Pakistan. Or any of the other teams who are still sort of playing in a slightly more staid manner. But actually, I take that back. That was unnecessary. But it was incredibly fun to watch. Put it that way.
Ben, there was a tactical element to it as well, because what I was describing was my reaction watching it live. But what became very apparent 25 balls into that innings was there was an element of a plan there, in that he didn't start by doing that to Bumrah. Bumrah started so well, he couldn't get a bat on anything. And how Konstas played Bumrah was completely different to how he played Siraj. And whilst he's done this sometimes in his very short domestic career before this, he doesn't always do this. So it's not as if this is him going out blind and being like, I'm going to do this regardless of what I come across.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, working out the logic, actually, you always see these stats, don't you, which I think is slightly misleading, but 2 out of India's first 60 balls would have hit the stumps, that kind of thing. And if it is true that bowlers that they're bowling for your outside edge, if you do try and ramp it, you're probably either going to miss it or you're going to hit it over everyone. Like it's more rare that you're going to sort of get a feather on that and it's going to go through to a slip than it is that if you get a feather on sort of a defensive shot. I think that probably holds up. I'm not totally sure, but I think that would probably be the logic, especially the guy's not set back. But you're right to say that this isn't his game. I mean, and I think that would be surprising to people who watched him in the BBL if they had done that when he comes out and plays a couple of sparkling innings. But actually, there was a stat that one of the cricket analysts put out that before this, he'd only played one ramp shot in first-class cricket. And that was actually a few weeks ago. And actually, I think the turning point for him was they played this warm-up game, this pink ball warm-up game against an India team where the first day was completely washed out. So the second day they said, well, let's have some pink ball practice, but we'll do like a 50 over thing. So it's kind of sort of like you're playing in, first class mode, sort of like you're just having a hit. And I think Konstas there was just like, well, I'm just going to have some fun and see what happens. Tries a few ramp shots, sees that they work, and then it kind of thinks like, oh, okay, I actually can do this. So I think that innings was a little bit of a catalyst as well. I guess the other thing I feel about this innings is it is a great debut, even though it's only 60. It's one of the great debuts, really. But it's also, I'm not sure it's a debut that like convinces me that this kid definitely has like staying power. There's loads to like, and I really hope he does. But it's also like, it's just so singular, such like a singular knock that like either he is able to ramp every new ball bowler he ever faces for 14 runs in an over, and then you do have this absolutely incredible player, or you have something that is not totally sustainable, and he will at some point need to teams might figure that out. But it was great fun to watch, and he's clearly so talented.
Yeah, but I think what is interesting is the talent point. There was a point where Bumrah's basically not missed his length all series, and Bumrah was trying different things and it wasn't necessarily working. Bumrah's first spell goes for more than 6 runs and over, and the skill required to play some of those shots I don't think should be underestimated. I think there's one pinpoint Yorker that Bumrah nailed, and Konstas hit that over fine leg, I think, for a 6. But again, I'll go back to the point in terms of he wasn't doing that to everything. So in terms of how sustainable it is, I don't think he's going to do this to everyone. And also, the other thing I'd say is He's born after the 2005 Ashes. He is so young. He is 2 and a bit years younger than Bethel, who is also really young. So even if he doesn't do anything for the next 3 years, he's an amazing talent that we can be very excited about. One thread, Butch, we talked about before we started recording a couple of weeks ago, actually, that we didn't talk about on the pod, was the form of some really big name players who haven't done loads recently. So Kohli being one, Labuschagne one, and Steve Smith being another. Smith now has back-to-back hundreds. And if he got there through bloody mindedness in the third test match, this looked a little bit like Smith near his best. There was a fluency about his 100 in this instance. And if you look at his stance, he's looked like he's trying to do stuff that's more similar to what he did in 2019, where he had that extreme success. How difficult is it for a player when you've had a lot of success and then suddenly it's not working for you, and you're in a series against someone like Bumrah, one of the best of all time, and you're scrambling to find solutions? It's extremely impressive to do that mid-series.
Yeah, what are you asking me, or are you asking? You could be asking either of us there. I don't know.
I was asking you.
I think the interesting thing has been the sort of like the journey that he's been on since, the heady days of him being the the preeminent batter of the era. There was a time where you were thinking perhaps he's fallen out of love with the game. He went off to go and disappear go and live in New York, whatever it might be. He'd had this strange dalliance with opening the batting. And by all accounts, his mind is very busy. Let's put it that way. And it wouldn't surprise me if he hadn't at some point sort of decided that that it was all very well and good scoring the runs that he scored the way that he'd done them, but there was a way of making it better. And then perhaps it not going so well. I've got no idea really. But one thing's for sure, you do not have the talent to score those sort of runs against the best bowlers in the world over such a long period of time. That it deserts you completely, and that at some point, as long as the will remains, to sort of stick at it and to keep working hard and keep trying to figure out, solve the puzzle, that at some point you're going to come back into some sort of nick, and what a fabulous time to do it. And you're right about the fluency side of it, and it is pretty stark how similar his stance and sort of setup is to those years 4 or 5 years ago, where he's got sort of wide open, shuffling across the off stump, the huge back and across movement, the back lift going out to gully, that whole thing. He's kind of gone back to that. But you can understand with a mind like his, where he might have decided that he got slightly bored with being able to score lots of runs in that mad way and decided he wanted to try and do it in a more orthodox fashion. I don't know. But all I can tell you is that all the while that he is desperate in the way that he seems to be to go out there and take on the competition, he will score runs. He'll have periods of time where he doesn't score very many, because technically that's what should happen with the way that he has been successful over all these years. But then he'll also have periods of time where you can't bowl at him at all, and he will score mountains.
Yeah, I guess the other thing with Smith is that I think this has been sort of a more understandable decline in some ways than comparing it to Virat Kohli, because actually when you look at the decline, it's only a decline from like such a high peak. Like 2021, he averages 54, 2022, 58, 2023, 42. And actually this year it's 35, but he looks sort of back to his, close to his best now. And it just makes sense when you watch him bat that it's so dependent on his eye, basically, because it's basically saying, I've got my eye on off stump, so I'm going to have perfect judgment of what's outside off. And if it's on my legs, I'm going to hit it. And then there's just a little bit of phase where it's like, if it's on his legs, maybe he's not quite going to hit it, sort of thing. It's just not so guaranteed, along with him tinkering a bit here and there to try and maybe counter the fact that his eye was going a bit. And it's also just, that peak was the closest we've had to Bradman, and, done in a way that no one else has basically tried to bat before or since, really. So it's hugely impressive and concerning. I guess you still think that, I think he did tinker with his technique for that reason, because there was just a little bit of probably physical decline in there. I guess we'll see. These have been really good. He looks really good. This wasn't the absolute toughest surface, and I think that was probably true of the previous test as well. But then we might also get some flat pitches for the Ashes next year. which also tend to suit him. So, and yeah, I think it's also just a credit to his bloody-mindedness is something, again, because there's so much kind of on the surface that catches your eye that you could almost not look upon. But some of those innings, like obviously his peak as a batter was 2017 in India. Actually, just that Ashes tour that came at the end of that year, when he was just like, I think I'm just the only guy who can be counted on to score runs, and I am just not going to get out. And like that's when he's at his most scary, I think, basically.
Butch, you mentioned earlier on that Rohit Sharma was under a lot of pressure. There was a bit of drama going into the test match in that Rohit changed his batting position. He had been batting in the middle order. Rahul and Jaiswal were going well up top, and they disrupted that opening partnership. Rahul dropping to 3, Gill dropping out of the 11. A lot of talk around Rohit. I wanted to ask you about Kohli, though, because, I don't know, with all this Fab Four, when one succeeds, you're interested in how the other guys are doing. And Smith is a very similar age to Kohli, and Smith, he's managed to get through this, as Ben puts it, actually quite a short downward trend of form. For Kohli, it's been quite a long time now where he's had the occasional 100. He's scored some really good, gritty 70s and 80s in difficult conditions in South Africa last winter. But it's a really long time since we saw him at his fluent best. And I've seen a lot of people say that he basically, against seam, gets out in 2 ways quite regularly. He sort of fends off against balls that are really good, basically like a fourth stump ball, and he nicks off. That happens. Players have always got out like that. But the other type of dismissal that is really quite common is basically half volleys, like wide balls that he would 5 years ago punch through the covers. That is a legitimate way to attack Kohli at the moment. And at a very fundamental level, it feels like he can't be at his fluent best without taking quite a lot of risk, because that cover drive is a risky shot for him now. And it's been a long time since we saw him nail it, basically.
Yeah. It's slightly bizarre, the whole thing. I mean, I think I've probably said this before, but, you know, I was there in India during COVID when, you know, in India changed sort of like the course of their home test match pitch preparation. You know, Root scores a double 100, England win the first test. And from that moment on, they play on pitches that are less than fun to bat on. And Kohli, along with, I think, Rahane, maybe, and a couple of others, just could not score a run at home. And when you cut off your supply, one thing that Stephen Smith has never had is long trots and not scoring runs in Australia, right? He will struggle, whether it be England, it doesn't matter where it is, but overseas he'll have a bit of a rough time of it, as most players tend to do over the course of their career. But if you cut off your blood, the blood running through your veins and his runs at home for a long period of time, even though the team is scoring runs, it can mess with you. And to me, it seems to have done so almost terminally to somebody like Kohli, who he's an oppressive batter. You know, he plays at his best when he's oppressing the opposition and imposing himself upon them. And he's been unable to do that to any degree at home. And then things are more difficult when you travel away from home. You got a little bit more pace on the ball, maybe a bit more seam movement on the ball, and he wants to go at sort of top bowlers with that extra cover drive and show him who's boss. The one thing that surprises me, I suppose, is that over that period of time that he hasn't done something about it, i.e., just decided not to do it. You know, not the whole, you know, Sachin Tendulkar story about that one innings thing, but just to go, you know what, unless I'm 50 or 60, I'm just not playing it. I'll make them bowl it at me until such a time as I'm in and the ball's a little bit older. And that's the one thing where you can kind of go, well, you know, there's not a lot of sympathy for that, because if you're a player that likes to have a hook and they keep putting 2 men back and you keep sticking it down their throat, you're an idiot, right? It's the same thing. It's the same damn thing. So, you know, that's been a real surprise that he hasn't been able to temper his instincts for any length of time in order to say, you know what, I can bite my pride a little bit here until such a time as everything is working in great order, and then I can go back to oppressing and imposing, which is how I like to play.
Ben, if India superstars struggling at the moment, or two India superstars are struggling at the moment. They potentially found another one in Nitish, Kumar, Reddy. It's a knock that probably won't be talked about quite as much now because of the end result, but he's looked really good in glimpses this series, and it's an extraordinary backstory in that he averaged 21 with the bat going into the series. He was basically picked because of his bowling averages in the low 20s with bat and ball in first-class cricket. A brilliant 100, and he looks so good. He looks like he could bat in the top 6 for basically anyone.
Yeah, he does, and I think that based on his bowling so far, that if there's anywhere that's his long-term future, it would have to be at least in the top 7, because it's been a confusing sort of series for him, because he's contributed. This wasn't really a surprise, really, actually, this innings with the bat, because he's looked pretty solid and unflustered whenever he's come to the crease. And it was. I think it was just such a nice, normal 100 in some ways. I think, you'd expect when you pick a guy who's a bowling all-rounder who's down at number 8, and you're in a bit of a tricky situation, that he's going to come out and sort of it's going to be a flurry of strokes. There's some really nice stroke play in there, but it was mostly just pretty orthodox stuff. And actually the shot with which he got to his 100 was gorgeous. Was sort of a lofted on drive, and also not trying to overhit any of these shots as well. Like that, he hit it as he wanted to, and it wasn't close to going for 6. He was just like, I'm just popping it over you at mid on, and that's what I'm looking to do. So yeah, he's really good, but it is a puzzle about how India kind of go about rebalancing their 11, because you saw the other side of his selection on day 4 when Bumrah, Rohit, basically the captain, was just asking Bumrah to bowl again and again and again, and Bumrah was at points in Hindi saying to him, I just can't bowl anymore. And but Bumrah is so good that he can still find that he can keep it going, but that is going to come at a cost at some point. We've seen him have workload related injuries in the past, and India cannot afford to lose him ahead of what is another massive test series in India next year. And part of the issue why he has to bowl so much is because Nitish Reddy is not a test quality seamer yet. So but he does look so good with the bat. And also you can get these weird things in long test series where you kind of go in with sort of like a quite orthodox team at the start of a series, and by the end, actually, your guys who are in form are not the guys you expected to be. So you either kind of stick with a plan that's not working, or you go with something which at the beginning of the series would have looked kind of mad. They wouldn't have thought at the start of the series we're going to be picking Nitish Reddy at the top 6 and maybe leaving out the captain or something. I'm not saying it's quite going to be that, but it's a strange situation when you've got your captain, your great Rohit Sharma opening, and actually the guy you're backing to score more runs is down at number 7 and 8 on his first test tour. But that's the situation that they're in.
Yeah, but one of my favourite games is not predicting the England 11 for the first test of an Ashes tour. It's predicting the England 11 for the 5th test of an Ashes tour. Great game.
I'll tell you what. Anybody that got that right on the 2002-3 series is an absolute genius, because there were players being flown in and flown home on that trip like you would not believe. So yeah, good game. Like it.
I was going to say that's not even in my top 3 mental Sydney 11s for England in Ashes series.
No, during that period where there was an Ashes every 2 weeks, there was the Mason Crane,
Scott
Borthwick,
Boyd Rankin,
yeah. Okay, all right. Well, it's a good game. Let's see if we can get it right for next winter.
There's so many other things that happened in this game. You had the Kohli Konstas shoulder barge incident and the subsequent fine and lack of demerit points handed Kohli's way.
That's bizarre, that, isn't it? I mean, that's an incredible thing when you consider what happened to Rabada, who I'm sure we'll get onto for cricketing reasons in not too distant future. But it's just how do they come up with the punishments that go from somebody getting in your face and doing something that was pretty pretty beyond the pale, really, if you're looking at normal cricketing behaviour from Rabada that earned him a ban, and actually making physical contact with a player that you've gone out of your way to go and bump into, and you don't even get a sanction. That's just absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
No, I 100% agree. Just because of another ICC-related topic we're going to get to later on in the pod, I think it's worth clarifying, and I think this is an area that Ben's normally on top of. This, in fairness, is actually quite consistent with what the ICC have done in the last 5 years. So,
right.
Basically, the level of punishment that Kohli would have needed to get a ban would have been a level of punishment I think they've only given out twice in the last 5 years, and both of them have been for ball tampering. So, in the ICC's own procedure, they don't ban players automatically for what Kohli did in this instance. But I completely agree with you. You know,
What if he'd punched him in the face? I mean,
well, that would be unprecedented, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, but yeah. Contact is contact, right? You're not supposed to have any.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Just the final thing on this test, Butch. Bumrah's got 200 test wickets at 19 and a half now. He's on track for a truly historic tour. If he goes roughly as well in Sydney as he's gone previously in this series, he's going to end up with basically as many wickets any team has ever got in a 5 test match series. We're talking Johnson 2013-14 levels, maybe even better. JD asks, a question for Mark. As a left-hand top-order batter, how would you look to combat Bumrah when he's bowling from around the wicket? What guard are you taking? What threat are you prioritising? Where are you looking to score, etc., etc.?
Okie doke. Well, middle and off, probably. Middle and off, probably batting outside my crease. I want the length that he predominantly bowls to be bouncing over the top of the stumps. And then you hope to get a thigh pad on one and bat at the other end. That's it. Well, one thing I would say was that as a general rule to right arm bowlers bowling around the wicket, an area that I would normally view as being my very strongest, which would be 10 yards to the left of point and down through sort of gully from that arc onwards, when the bowler's right arm over with the ball going across, I kind of not even think about hitting it there, and would straighten that up to sort of like extra cover at the squarest, extra cover mid off, mid on, mid wicket, square leg. So the whole my arc of scoring, or where I'm thinking about scoring anyway, would shift very much straighter. And which doesn't mean you can't hit it through there, but it kind of, I wouldn't be thinking about trying to get the ball in that area, because you're playing very much into the bowler's hands. And then you need a bit of luck. He's going to bowl you jaffers. Judgment's got to be damn good, and you just hope you miss the odd one along the way. And as I said, inside edge at the square leg and run.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating seeing how well he's doing. It's
he's
200
incredible.
Test wickets in. No one with 200 Test wickets has a better average. He pretty much exclusively plays away from home. His breakdown of wickets, he's got more than 150 wickets away from home. He's got the best average away from home of anyone with that many away wickets.
Well, I mean, this year has been, what is he averaging, 14 or something this year? Strike rate of 30, 71 wickets. I mean, it's complete madness.
And when you add in also this year, he's had one of the great white ball tournaments as well in that T20 World Cup. I think is the first, the lowest column rate for a guy to bowl 20 overs in a T20 World Cup, as India sort of break the hoodoo that has hung over them for a generation basically. And he's player of the tournament, so yeah, it's quite something.
Yeah, quite something.
Related question, but from Kartikeyan, who says, no one tries to swing the ball anymore. Everyone tries to seam it, which is a lot harder to face. So do you think the batters and batting coaches are doing enough to come up with a method to counter that? What could or should be done to do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing with swing over seam or seam over swing is that swing is much harder to predict. You'll have days where the ball just simply won't. There's nothing you can do about it. And I suppose there are certain surfaces that you can play on where the ball won't seam very much either. But one thing when you're seaming the ball is that you're never 100% sure as to which way it's going to go, and the batters don't get any clues. That they don't know, you don't know, and it's very, very tough to play under those circumstances. I think a lot of basic technical stuff is based around countering sort of seam and swing movement. The difference being that, as I've said, the swing you can telegraph. A swing you can know which way it's going from the time the bowler puts the ball in his hand at the top of his mark if you're looking close enough. Whereas with seam, it's much more difficult to fathom, and the ball moves later, obviously. So, what do you do to counter it? You good footwork forward and back, straight back. All of the things that sort of like stand the test of time, and having the ability to be aggressive, to be able to hit sort of good balls. If you're presuming that you're playing against bowlers of a high quality, you have to be able to hit good balls for four, or be able to turn good balls into singles and rotate strike and all that type of stuff. There's no sort of magic formula to it, I'm afraid. I mean, I suppose that the one thing that the best players would do, they would try to get as close to the ball as possible, get closer to it. You give it less chance to move. And the modern theory is you just don't get close to it at all and try and hit it over the keeper's head.
Yeah.
So you can't say they're not doing anything. They're trying stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
I think one of Butcher's sort of big hobby horse a couple of seasons ago was about the off stump guard.
Yeah.
And I think in general you were right to sort of say that this isn't going to be a catch-all method that works for everyone, and is that there's some flaws with it. But I think that was an attempt by batters to work out how to play the seaming ball, and I think something you discussed then as well, which I think has more likelihood of working. Actually, you see this with Steve Smith, is not starting an off stump, but moving to off stump, is sort of taking a little shuffle across that gets you across, and also you're already moving at that point, so you're maybe more likely to be able to react. There's also stuff you can do training. Remember when I spoke to Daryl Mitchell for the wobble seam piece, he said that at Worcestershire they were lining bits of string down the wickets in the nets because they wanted to sort of recreate sort of seam movement that would come a bit at random, and then do that with a dog stick. So there's, I guess, things you can do in training, and there are some technical schools of thought. And obviously, Ben Stokes, one of the big ones, to sort of, I think he likes just come down the track sort of 1 in every 3 or something, just to let them know he has it in his locker. But it would be interesting. I reckon there will be a batter at some point who, tries to do that almost every ball, because I think if I can just turn everything to a half volley, then the seam movement can't do anything for me. But yeah.
I mean, so there are lots of, I suppose, coming down the wicket. It kind of that sounds like it's ultimately a very aggressive thing to do. But say for example somebody like Bumrah, right? He's quick and he can knock your head off. So it requires a bit of skill and a bit of bravery. But if you think about it, if you're as a right-hander coming down the pitch at somebody like Bumrah outside the line of off stumps, you can kind of get yourself so far inside the line that you take it on the body and you go out the other end. They're all quite kinds of different ways of, it isn't just run down and bang it back over his head. There are ways of kind of like being able to just make sure that you work as a partnership with the guy at the other end. I'm not going to get stuck down. This guy's bowling great. We're not going to get stuck at I'll take the bloke who's bowling pies at the one end, and you stick it out against Bumrah. You kind of you take the thing on as a partnership, and there are ways that you can do that. They're not passive, but they're not high risk taking, if you see what I mean. So they kind of give you they give you a percentage nudge into your favour, as opposed to it all being in his. But look, there's a good reason. There's that old thing about watching football and watching people talking about defensive errors and all this kind of stuff, and you think to yourself, well, how boring would the game be if defenders never made a mistake, or whatever score. Now, a guy like Bumrah, he's bowling magnificently well, and sometimes there isn't a damn thing you can do about it. That will change, as it changed with Smith, as it's changed with other great players over time. They don't always have it the right way, but for now, I think it's just marvel at his exquisite skill.
That's it for part 1. In part 2, South Africa are in the World Test Championship final. South Africa are in the World Test Championship final for the first time. Another epic Test match. They beat Pakistan by 2 wickets, thanks in part to a 51-run 9th wicket stand between Marco Jansen and Kagiso Rabada to get the Proteas over the line. Again, brilliant Test match, so many talking points. Mohammad Abbas bowled unchanged for basically half a day, taking a 6-fer in the 4th innings. It was quite a spicy deck. There was a 5-fer in the first innings for Dane Patterson. Corbin Bosch made an extraordinary debut, carded in at 9, scored 81 not out, and took a 4-fer in the first innings, bowls 89 miles per hour. South Africa found another one there. Ben, more generally, what a moment for South Africa. They've really gone through it in the last couple of years, both on and off the field. And it's a really special achievement. And people are talking about, oh, well, they had a slightly easier run. Sure, but they have gone on a really good run, especially when you take into account they sent their C team to New Zealand and lost 2-0 in a series that's in this cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you can take for granted just how actually a lot of teams do have weapons to hurt you. Pakistan came close to winning this game because they have good bowlers who can hurt you. Sri Lanka, they beat them 2-0. England couldn't whitewash Sri Lanka. South Africa went to Bangladesh, win 2-0. The Bangladesh side who had just gone to Pakistan and won there. So there's lots of reasons to to say that this is an achievement worth crediting and celebrating. And this was just an extraordinary finish, kind of all the way through. Well, all the way through that last innings, really, because you had that spell on the final evening where it's like, oh, are South Africa going to mess this up? And then you had Mark went on a bit of counterattack then, which I think masked just how slowly he was scoring on that fourth morning. So there was a point where you think this is going to take the best part of 2 sessions maybe, because they are really sort of just inching towards the target, albeit if at some point you could tire out Mohammad Abbas, which might not have been possible, I don't know. But then that does also leave open the fact that at some point there might be 4 balls that come along with your name, and it has happened. They went from 96, I think, for 4 to 99 for 8. With that was from and at that point you think this game is just done. Actually, it's not even going to be particularly close. And then Rabada used the best batter in Test history to average less than 12. It was just and this is the thing, we know he can play shots like this, and that's why how does he not have a Test half century? There's one in particular that was sort of both feet off the ground, sort of the best of Gordon Greenidge and Viv Richards kind of rolled into one. And that's also the kind of thing you can get in these small chases, is you can get these partnerships where kind of the air can be kind of sucked out of a situation quite quickly. There was still pressure when they got right towards that finishing line, but all of a sudden it was fun again. The crowd, and there was a decent crowd, and they made a lot of noise. We're cheering kind of not just every 4, but every single, and sort of going, oh, when there was a dot ball, that kind of thing. It was just great theatre, and you can see how much it meant to South Africans at the end. Also, a great line from Temba Bavuma in the post-match presser, and it delivered with a completely straight sort of deadpan face as well, just saying it's a bad day to be a beer, which was good.
To be a beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Desmond, I agree that I don't understand Rabada's batting. He's nicknamed Brian Charles Rabada, and that's obviously a ridiculous nickname. But that shot through the offside was ridiculous. He also took on Ahmed Jamal, hit him over his head for 4, just as they're getting close to the line. And also he was batting with Marco Jansen, who is batted as a number 6 in Test cricket. Yet it looked like Jansen was trying to get off strike and make sure Rabada, who averages 11, gets on strike. But with 3 World Test Championship cycles in, New Zealand obviously won the first one, India-Australia final in the second one, and now South Africa in the final for the first time. What are your thoughts on the World Test Championship now? We've actually seen quite a lot of it, because it feels like the last few months of Test cricket have been really, really fun to watch, and people are following series not involving the team they normally support because of the overall context of the World Test Championship that makes you want to check what's going on elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, it still has all of the same issues that it had from its inception. But I guess there is no denying that when it comes down to the final shake-up, and teams are still vying for the top 2 spots, as long as teams haven't run away with it, as they kind of did in the India-Australia year, the Australia one. Then yes, it does mean that there is a little bit of extra on a lot of these series. Whether or not that has much to do with what happens in the first 75% of it is debatable, and also it is still far too convoluted and confusing for it to kind of to feel as though it's a true reflection on who the best teams in the world are. It just happens to be who's in the shake-up when you come down to the last 3 months of the cycle. But that doesn't mean that it should be thrown out, and it doesn't mean that it's awful. I may have been rather scathing about it in the past, and I'm still not 100% sold, but I've certainly enjoyed what's happened over the last couple of months as a result of it. Yeah,
I mean, but Ben Stokes said something broadly similar. He says that the system is confusing. I appreciate it's not the simplest scoring method in the world, but you win your games, you qualify for the final.
Yeah, this is very true. This is very true. But you also have because the weight of a victory is is not as high depending on how many matches in the series that you played it in, and because not everybody plays everybody. The playing field is nowhere near level, so it can be a little bit dependent on the series that you have scheduled to play during that 2-year period of time, and that isn't a true way of deciding who the best two teams in the world are. But as you say, everybody knows what you got to do: win lots of games, win 60% of your matches, and you get there.
Ben, you're a WTC ultra. Do you want to come in to bat for the World Test Championship?
Well, I don't know if I am. I mean, the points thing. The thing is, it is confusing, but there's not really a way to solve it. And the problem is kind of because England, Australia, and India play 5 Test series against each other. Like if you were kind of starting from scratch and you weren't having, these series which you wanted to kind of maximize the value of, you would I think the way to do it would be say, either you do it over 2 years as we currently do and say, you play 6 Test series with 3 tests each, and then each game can be worth the same amount, then you just do it on points. Or you actually add another year and say everyone plays everyone. So you have 8 Test series. Not everyone plays everyone home and away, but that's fine. And again, 3 Test series. But the thing is, then you have Australia want to play 5 Test series, and that actually also that makes it harder in those seasons to have another series of sort of World Test Championship cycle length if you want those to be 3 Test series.
Yeah.
And then it also means that you either say only 3 tests from that series count, which would lead to weird situations where one team might win a series 3-2 and come away with fewer World Test Championship points than another team who's won the 2 tests that mattered.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing, just let me cut in there because I don't mind that, because the two things to me are slightly separate anyway. For me, as I've always maintained, every Test match on its own is an event, anyhow. And sometimes the wider context of a series versus the wider context of an individual test versus the wider context of a World Test Championship, they don't always marry up to deliver the same thing. So I wouldn't have an issue if the legacy series of the Ashes or India, Australia, or wherever it is, who are still able to play 5 Test match series are still there. This series now that's being played out between Australia and India, take away the promise of a World Test Championship final spot at Lords. Is that going to diminish the spectacle of this series one jot from start to finish? No, it doesn't make any bloody difference to it whatsoever. It's an add-on to it. But if it wasn't there, would anybody be like, "Oh my God, this is missing something"? No, they wouldn't. The series on its own is a thing. So I would have no issue with series of 5 being set right. Okay, well, I mean, we do it for a start. Didn't England play a series against New Zealand where there were no World Test, or was it the West Indies? I can't remember.
Against New Zealand, yeah.
So you play a Test match series that has nothing to do with the World Test Championship itself. So it happens. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that in terms of series. Scheduling wise, it makes it difficult because it hoovers up so much time to play a 5 Test match series. But that's something for them to figure out. But I would have no issue with that happening, whereby the series length that everybody plays who's involved in the World Test Championship table are the same. So you don't have a situation where there is a fifth of points being awarded over a 5 Test match series and a third for a Test match win being over a 3 Test match series, because it skews the whole thing.
Yeah, and I guess that, I know Butch sort of had a pop at 4-day tests earlier, but I think that would help if you were to move from 2 Test series to 3 Test series, because you can schedule 12 days of cricket rather than 10 days, and also you can then actually, for a 3 Test series, it's a bit of a slog, but you can go, Friday to Monday, just about for 3 games. I mean, it's what they do in the County Championship for 7 or 8 weeks at the start of the season. So
that's what we've always said. We've always said that the County Championship is the model for scheduling globally.
Test cricket should be more like the County Championship. There we go. You heard it here first. My days. You know what I'd like to say? I'd just throw something completely out there. Is that you have a 10 or 12 team Test match sort of knockout thing where you play one test. You fly in, you play a one-off Test match. You have 2 groups or whatever, and they play home and away one Test match in each of their venues. You finish top of the table. You play a semi-final, final, done. That's it. And then you don't need to worry about you actually make Test match cricket a knockout scenario. Um, I think that would be awesome.
I'm all for knockout Test cricket. Yeah, at neutral venues as well.
Yeah.
So, like, can you imagine like Sri Lanka versus Afghanistan at Taunton? Like, how amazing would that be? That'd be so good.
Knockout Test cricket.
Anyway.
That'd be quality. And you'd have to come up with some sort of way of deciding who comes out on top over the course of a draw. But that's for people much smarter than me. But that would be very cool.
I think Taunton's actually where India and Pakistan should play their neutral games as well.
Well, obviously, Shakib is no longer allowed actually at Taunton after his one-off appearance last year. Anyway, that is it for part 2. In part 3, the Champions Trophy. Before we get to the Champions Trophy, Matthew asks, Ben and Yas, is this Ollie Stone at the darts dressed as Woody from Toy Story? I guess that you guys would be able to identify. So Matthew has tweeted in at 11:06 p.m. last night with a screenshot of the darts, and front and center is Ollie Stone fully kitted out as Woody from Toy Story. And you see a lot of celebrities at the darts, but normally in civilian wear. They're casually dressed. They don't get into the spirit of it. So to see Ollie Stone in and amongst it, dressed as Woody, not that long since he came back from New Zealand from the Test tour, obviously only a few days after Christmas, I think is great to see. So well done, Ollie Stone.
Do you think McCullum out there? Ollie Stone wasn't picked for a game in that series. Maybe his pace was a bit down the nets, and McCullum says, "Can't you be more like Mark Wood? Can't you be a bit more like Woody?" And Ollie Stone's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll try it."
Very good.
There's a snake in my deliveries. Is that something? I don't know.
Very good. Mention it up top, but there's a test match going on between Zimbabwe and Afghanistan at the moment in Bulawayo. Basically every run scoring record involving those two sides has been broken this series. Zimbabwe scored their highest ever score. They scored 586. And Afghanistan are still going in their response. They're 684 for 6 at the time of recording. Rahmat Shah and Hashmatullah Shahidi have both scored double hundreds there. That's Afghanistan's highest ever score in Test cricket.
Just happened as well. So I was on Lara watch with Shahidi because there's no way this game's going for a result. So he could have just batted all day, out for 246. Then in comes Azmatullah Omartsai, out first ball, coming in at 679 for 5. That's cricket for you, isn't it?
We were talking about good crowds. There's actually been a really healthy crowd in at Bulawayo this week. So there's a quite cool video of the Zimbabwean youngster Brian Bennett getting to his first Test 100, and he goes wild. The crowd goes wild. So again, good scenes for Test cricket. So the Champions Trophy, we've got some news around that. First of all, but let's start with the news of where it's going to be played. This has been a topic for discussion for a really long time. We sort of had an inkling of where it was going to go. So it's not a huge surprise, but even though it's not a surprise, it's a massive story. India are not going to travel to Pakistan following government advice. All India fixtures will take place in Dubai, including the final if they get there, and the semi-final, regardless of where India finish in their group, will be in Dubai. Echoes of what happened in the T20 World Cup, where India were the only team that absolutely knew where they were going to have their semi-final. But obviously there's more going on here. Butch, what's your immediate reaction to this? This is supposed to be the one of 3 global men's events, and it feels like a little bit of integrity has been lost in the scheduling of this competition.
Yes, yeah, but as you mentioned, no surprise. I mean, when it was announced that the Champions Trophy was going to be in Pakistan, that the first question that anybody would have asked was, okay, well, where are India going to play? Are they going to go? Very, very unlikely, sort of politically, that they were going to show up and play. And then it was a question for the ICC as to what they were going to do about it. Again, unsurprisingly, everything is being done to make sure that India can take part in the competition and play. And we are where we pretty much all imagine we would be, that they would have their fixtures, and teams would have to shuttle in and shuttle out to go and play them at their home venue in Abu Dhabi, whilst the competition continues on elsewhere. I don't really know what to say about it. Yes, I'll be honest with you, because because I couldn't see any other way that this wouldn't be the outcome. With the only other outcome being that they said, okay, well, I'm sorry, we'll get the number 9 team in the world to come in and play in your place. If you're not going to go, we've awarded the competition to Pakistan. This is where it's taking place. If you have political or security reasons for not wanting to go, then we'll carry on without you. And that was never going to happen. So look, we are where we are. The tournament will be. I don't know. I don't know if the luster has kind of gone out of the Champions Trophy simply because there are so many other ICC tournaments now. Obviously, we have World T20s every couple of years, and the World Cup's only just gone by, and it just seems as though it's a bit superfluous, the entire thing, which doesn't mean that it won't be great fun to watch, and there's bound to be great stories and great cricket coming out of it. But you kind of think in a time and an era where we're looking at sort of ways endlessly, slicing down test matches from 5 days to 4, to find more room, to find more space in increasingly packed schedules, is this one really necessary? But I'm going to watch it. I'll have fun watching it, and I'm sure you guys will as well. But I think it's something that's up for worthy debate anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say I hope that we're all watching it, because otherwise we won't have a lot to talk about.
You know what I mean, as a punter, not as a serious working gentleman.
Quite right. Ben, how do you view it? There was a pretty punchy piece from Tim Wegmore in the Telegraph that was going through the context of this, in that in cricket's recent history, when there have been political reasons to not travel to a country, that team has just forfeited those individual fixtures. And Tim also pointed out how, not just in the T20 World Cup, with India knowing exactly where their semi-final would be and no one else did, there are examples of India traditionally, actually now, their last group stage game is always after everyone else's, and it tends to be against the weakest team in the group. So India go into that game knowing exactly what they need from that game, and Tim is basically suggesting this is more than just a coincidence now.
Yeah, and he's spot on with those. But also, there's have we just given up on the idea that some people might like to go to these events to watch them and travel there, and to have these global events be sort of pinnacle events in the sport that become kind of like a festival of cricket, where as you see in football tournaments, or in basically all other sports tournaments, where you have a big global event, there's loads of build up. You can sort of get your wall chart out and plot it in and know who's going to be where and plan your routes and get your tickets and stuff. And that is just not a thing that is possible in cricket anymore these days. I mean, and particularly in the World Cup last year, when they announced the schedule ridiculously late and then changed about a fifth of the games a month later, and then this one as well. I want to go to the Champions Trophy final. Great, it's either going to be in Pakistan or Dubai. I guess you buy flights and book hotels to both places, and maybe see you there. And cricket is behind other sports, I think, in how it treats spectators in some way. So this bit of it doesn't get a look in, versus sort of the geopolitics and the political heft of the BCI. But it is worth considering, because it does elevate these tournaments so much. If you have these massive these crowds from different nations bringing their own flavour to the games that their countries are involved in, and you're barely going to get a travelling fan at this event. And at some of the Dubai games, you might you might get not great crowds overall. I guess it's India involved, so hopefully they'll give out some free tickets and that sort of thing. But that's another cost to this. And I think the IC have basically just, despite being an organisation that pretty much just exists to manage events. And by the way, when you're looking at why the Champions Trophy exists, you've got a global event every year you've got either a men's ODI T20 World Cup every year between 2021 and 2031. 2 years they weren't, 2025 and 2029. So it's I guess let's stick a Champions Trophy in there. That's why it exists, because the IC exists just to do events. And they're not good at doing events. So that's also another thing that I think is worth talking about, because I don't think the cricket spectator gets enough sort of acknowledgement in these kind of things sometimes as well.
Yeah, it's going back on what you were saying, Butch. You talked about the luster of the Champions Trophy perhaps being lost. Was it there in the first place?
No, it probably was.
Pre-T20 World Cup?
Yeah, it probably wasn't. I think it's always been a kind of a meh thing. It kind of, and as Ben rightly points out, it kind of sneaks up on you. There's no real reason to kind of like to get excited about it in the way that you would do a Euros or a World Cup. And it kind of happens, and people kind of watch it, and if it's good, you get swept up in it, and if it isn't, it passes you by, and you move on to the next thing. It's kind of, I'm not entirely sure what it's for. I've never been entirely sure what it's been for, other than the obvious, which is to make cash.
But it'll be great to watch England have a squad out for the Champions Trophy. Joe Root is back. That's probably the headline news from an England point of view. Ben Stokes is not there in the last week since we last recorded. It's been confirmed he's going to miss at least the next 3 months with a recurrence of the hamstring injury that saw him miss 4 test matches earlier in 2024. Other headline omissions, I'd say. No Sam Curran in either squad. In England are going to India before the Champions Trophy for ODIs and T20s. There's no Will Jackson. There's no Reece Topley. All 3 guys who've been properly involved with pretty much everything England white ball related since the 2023 World Cup. Ben, very interesting squad just because of who is involved in the selection process. This is Brendan McCullum's first squad as cross-format head coach, and he sees the test guys all the time, and he will have opinions on all of them. It's interesting to see who he's kept, who he's got rid of.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't want to read loads into it because he will still understand that these are different formats. But along with the guys that you named, I think almost there's two that I think that the most interesting in some ways is Zach Crawley, not in not in the T20s, but not in the ODIs, when he just looks like he has the game for ODI cricket when he's at his best. And then also Sam Curran, as you mentioned, but also in the context of Stokes having a hamstring injury, and the fact that England are going to have to, if Stokes gets through 10 tests against India and Australia, amazing. Possible that he won't, and especially in Australia, it's not clear how England go about replacing him. Sam Curran would be, in some people's eyes, an option to do that. And from the looks of this, maybe McCullum doesn't rate him that highly. And then just going back to the Crawley thing, then you get into the, you can sort of speculate in your own head what this might mean for the first Test 11 of next summer. But what this does indicate to me is that I think Bethel will be in that 11 because they just clearly really, really like him, because they are just picking him in absolutely every squad now. And, with some justification and more every time he puts on an England shirt. But that is interesting. And the Root thing is interesting too. He wasn't good at the World Cup, and I think we said then that, maybe it was a mistake not to have him play much ODI cricket between tournaments and expect him to just turn it on when he gets one. And now we're basically asking him to do the same thing again. But he's also pretty good. So, it might be that he can just do that this time. And that was sort of a one-off. But that's the thing to follow as well, I think.
I think it's also a slight admission that with 50 over cricket not being T20 cricket, as it was thus described or prescribed in the in England's selections and England's kind of attitude towards 50 over cricket since the World Cup win in 2019, that somebody like Joe Root going back in there to add a little bit of ballast, a little bit of finesse, a little bit of the opportunity to kind of knit together 50 overs worth of batting with all of the monsters that England could put around him in a batting lineup is a bit of an admission that didn't go very well. The Sam Curran thing is interesting, mainly from the point of view that they replaced him with Jamie Overton. Now, Jamie Overton was taken to the West Indies on the one-day international T20 white ball squads, even though he wasn't quite fit. But I think basically because they incredible ball striker who probably wouldn't be asked to come in anywhere higher than number 8, unless you're, messing around with it. As you card the team anyway, be down at 8, who can really hit the ball at the back end. But also as somebody that can bowl Plunkett-like overs in the middle period of the 50 over game, which is without any question not Sam Curran's forte. Now, Sam Curran, if he was going to play, and we had this conversation ad nauseum during the previous World Cup, was that he's either got to sort of take the new ball to swing it as a bowler, or bat 6, no lower than 6, and England just don't have room for him to do either of those things when they're at full strength. And so that is the reason I think why he's been preferred to Overton, who just operates in a completely different way in 50 over and T20 cricket to that of somebody like Sam Curran. So it's a massive blow to him, I should imagine personally, but I can completely understand as to why, given what the rest of the squad looks like, the batting depth, Root going back in there, Saki Mahmood being involved as a new ball bowler now with Archer and co. They didn't need Sam Curran's very specific set of skills as much as they might need somebody else's.
Yeah, and Ben, that's another good point to pick on, is actually just the makeup of the seam bowlers for the Champions Trophy. It's pace, basically. Archer, Atkinson, Carse, Jamie Overton, Sakeem Mahmood, and Mark Wood. Good to see Sakeem Mahmood in there. He had a really good tour of the West Indies, but it's a sort of tour that people might have forgotten quite quickly. When he's on song, he's really exciting to watch.
Yeah, and almost one of the great lost Baz ballers in some way, when he lit up. He was basically the one positive from that tour of West Indies just before it, and you think this guy's going to be a massive part of England's future in all formats, and then has injury hell for so long, only just coming out of it this year. Brilliant. Like one of my moments of the year, to be honest, was from that 100 final, that he just completely kind of broke open full over Invincibles with had some of the best T20 players in the game just completely clueless against him. And I guess that's another one as well, is that he's kind of the other side of things, where we've been talking a lot with McCullum going into the white ball setup in terms of who are some test players that he can bring into the fold in white ball cricket. That you wonder if there might be a couple of guys he sees in white ball cricket that he likes the look of as well. Mahmood fits a lot of the profile of what England like, I suppose, in terms of his pace in particular. And he's just very skillful bowler, can get some reverse swing, can be one of his weapons. Maybe he's a bit skiddier than they might like in terms of profile of quicks they look for in Test cricket, but also, all sorts of profiles can be useful in different conditions. So I think, hugely encouraging to see him back. So just pleased for him, because he's such a thrilling bowler to watch when he's bowling quickly, and there's so many tools in his arsenal, but then also, I guess generally from a more tactical point of view, is they've got all the seam bowlers, which means they don't have very many spinners. Basically, they've got Adil Rashid and then some part timers. So the seam bowlers are going to have to rotate, but do a lot of the work when they're in the team. Hope that Adil Rashid's sort of shoulder continues to stay together, and then fill in the overs elsewhere, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. That is everything for today's show. Cheers, Butch. Cheers, Ben. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast, and that is it for 2024. Have a great new year. We will see you next week.
Merry New Year.